Tax cuts often increase tax revenue and create new jobs. In this episode, I'm going to address the question that I've been asked thousands of times: are tax cuts good for the economy? Absolutely, but I want you to understand the dynamics of raising taxes or raising the revenue that's being taxed. So I'm Doug Andrew. I've been a financial strategist, a tax specialist for more than 46 years, and I've loved helping people redirect otherwise payable taxes to causes they support, because this is not really a political agenda. I have met with many Republicans, many Democrats, and I've never met one yet that if I gave them the choice, would you like to redirect otherwise payable taxes to causes you support, that they didn't say absolutely. So it's interesting, if we look at the pie chart of where the federal government in the United States spends our tax dollars, we know where our tax dollars go. Sometimes Americans don't even know this. But if I just take the general categories, if there's 6 or 8 or 10 places where tax revenue generally is spent, I will list those. And I'll ask people, Republican or Democrat, so if you had $1 million that knew you had to pay in tax, where would you allocate that $1 million of taxes you pay? In what percent would you allocate it to this cause, this cause, this cause, this cause, this cause? It never comes close to where the federal government actually spends our tax dollars. And so I often ask, how did we get here? If most Americans would not allocate voluntarily that their taxes are divided up this way, why is it that the government has for years allocated our tax dollars in these different areas in way greater percentages than we would ever voluntarily give? So I want to give you a little bit of history on fiscal and monetary policy, 2 basic viewpoints. Again, this is not a political agenda. If this resonates with you, I would encourage that you learn more about what I'm talking about in one of my books. Be sure and click on the link below. Get a free copy of my most recent best-selling book called The Laser Fund. You just pay $5.95 shipping and handling. I'll send out the book. I'll pay for the book. You pay for the shipping, and you can learn more in depth about what I'm talking about here. But let's talk about 2 basic philosophies. And once you understand these, you'll be able to look back historically for decades and understand why certain tax laws were passed based upon who was primarily in power in Congress or in the executive branch. And you'll understand why certain tax laws were passed based upon these philosophies. So a lot of times people feel like that they ought to have government do more and more and more, pay for health care, give you free college, things like this, Medicare for all, whatever. That's one general political philosophy. Hey, let's have bigger and bigger government. And so generally speaking, the way they're going to fund the government doing all of this for us is to raise taxes. Oh, let's raise taxes. Now, they don't want their taxes raised. They say, oh no, tax the rich people. Take it from the rich people. Well, if you do the math, if rich people gave 100% of what they earned, it wouldn't cover some of the initiatives that seem to be popular today. But generally speaking, in history, if you need to raise tax revenue, sometimes the easiest way the Democrat Party says is, well, just raise taxes and let's take it from those who have the most money. And I'll go through and show you the percentage that most wealthy Americans pay in taxes. Now, the other philosophy generally falls under the Republican philosophy, where it's no, let's be more self-reliant. Let's not have the government do everything for us. Let's have limited government. And if we need to raise tax revenue for essential services, maybe healthcare, Medicare, maybe police, maybe protection, maybe fire departments, school teachers, let's raise the revenue that's being taxed, and we actually end up with more tax revenue than if you raise taxes. So based upon that, you'll sort of see tax laws that were passed, and I'll give you a few examples here in just a moment. But generally speaking, when you stimulate the economy, when you actually lower taxes. So the question that you searched on this particular episode is, are tax cuts good for the economy? Historically, in 1986, President Reagan, who was Republican, this was his second term, and he lowered taxes. Taxes were topping out at 70+% for people who made a lot of money. He lowered the tax brackets from 6 major brackets down to 2. And so there was a 15% bracket. If you made up to a certain amount of money, 25 to 30,000 back then, you paid 15% in federal tax. And then anything over that amount, you paid 28%. Now, there was this little bubble of 33%, but it was only to catch up that if you made a lot of money, you retroactively paid 28% from $1. But see, President Reagan believed that nobody in America should pay any more than 28% of their income to the federal government in tax. So that was the most, was 28%. Now, from Reagan through the 90s and 2000 to 2010 and so forth, what has happened is what's happened for many, many decades. Government giveth and taketh away. So all of a sudden we came back to about 5 or 6 brackets again, and they did away with deductions because President Reagan actually had to do away with a lot of the deductions back in 1986 by lowering taxes to no more than 28%, because he studied history and he found, he was a Christian. And in the Bible, God didn't require any more than 10%, but 10% from the poor person, a widow, 10% tithing to a wealthy person. But then he said to the wealthy, where much is given, much is required. And so in America, most wealthy people give in charity 30% or more of their income voluntarily because they want to designate where their social dollars go to. But when they're coerced, when they're forced to pay higher taxes, they sort of resent it, and it sort of hurts the economy. So when President Reagan did that, it set up the most prosperous decade in American history since the Great Depression, the decade of the 90s. Of course, Clinton wanted to take credit for that, but he did it by raising the revenue that was being taxed. He lowered taxes, and the economy started booming, and the revenue was crazy. And so even with a lower tax, because the revenue went through the roof, the actual tax revenue was greater than if they had raised taxes. Because he studied and realized that if you raise taxes, then people go, why should I expand my plant? Why should I expand my business? Why should I hire people? In fact, I need to now lay off people because you've raised taxes and I can't afford it, so I'm going to have to lay off people. And sometimes, a lot of general taxpayers, they don't understand that. They think, well, you have the money. Well, no, if you raise taxes to where more than 28% federal and another 5 to 12%, like in California, on top of the federal rate, if you take more than a third of people's income, pretty soon you are disincentivizing, you're discouraging them from being successful, hiring people, and expanding. That's why when you just raise taxes, people lose their jobs. People don't hire. During the Obama era, President Obama slowly was trying to do all this, but they didn't know what he was going to do. And so they just hunkered down and said, well, I'm not going to hire people. I'm not going to expand my business because I may have to end up laying off the people I just hired. So I'm just going to hunker down because they're not being forthright and telling us what they're going to do. Trump comes in and he says, I will lower taxes. In fact, states where they lowered taxes, people go, okay, great. And so the business owners went out and they began to hire and expand their businesses. Now, you can have all kinds of opinions on the internet on this, but history shows when you actually lower taxes, it increases the revenue that's being taxed. And so the lower tax rate on more revenue oftentimes equals or exceeds the revenue by raising taxes, which causes the economy to struggle and people lose jobs. And so those are the two basic philosophies. So the first answer that I would give you to the question, are tax cuts good for the economy? Absolutely, based on history, they have actually stimulated the economy. And the secondary objective is it actually created more tax revenue than by raising taxes, which hurt the economy or sent the economy into a recession or a tailspin. The problem is we get used to this revenue and then they say, okay, it's time to raise taxes again. This is a struggle that's been going on for a long time. Now, if you've heard enough already and you want to learn a little bit more about this, click on the link below, get a free copy of my most recent best-selling book. It's book number 11. It's called The Laser Fund. I'll pay for the book. You pay $5.95 shipping and handling. But let me go through and explain a little bit more and connect a few dots for you. So let me give you another example of when this happened. During the 1990s, Clinton, he wanted to reintroduce 5 or 6 different tax brackets and do away with deductions. And so that's what happens. Congress gets greedy and they need money. And so that's what started to happen, and the deductions were gone. And so this is why I say the government giveth and then the government taketh away. Well, then what happened in 2001? September 11th, 2 planes flew into 2 skyscrapers in New York City and so forth. And all of a sudden, the terrorists accomplished what they wanted to. People stopped going out to dinner. They stopped traveling and flying. And the fact of the matter is, more Americans in the previous quarter of a century, 25 years, had died in bathtub accidents than in hijacked airplanes. But we didn't stop taking baths after 9/11, but we stopped flying and we stopped traveling, we stopped eating, we stopped building homes. And so it sent the economy into a tailspin. Well, if you haven't noticed, the government is usually the last to lay off people. And they say, oh no, we can't afford to lay off people. We need to keep them, but we need revenue. And so sometimes they say, well, we got to raise taxes. Well, Bush was Republican or Democrat? Well, he was Republican. So that philosophy is, no. If you raise taxes when people are hurting, you're just going to create a bigger problem. And so he did the opposite. In 2001 and in 2003, he passed tax acts that lowered taxes. And economists studied this, and from 2001 to 2003 and 2005 and so forth, he actually raised more tax revenue by lowering taxes than if he had raised taxes. And he was able to have people create jobs, refinance their homes, because by lowering interest rates, this is called fiscal and monetary policy, people pretty soon just said, I can't afford not to refinance my house. My heavens, I can refinance at 4 or 5 or 6%, and their mortgage before was maybe 6, 7, or 8%. They go, I can't afford not to do this. Well, while I'm refinancing my house, it's now worth this. I'm going to take out some equity and finish a bathroom. Well, that means you now have contractors that have work. He created jobs, he created stimulus, and all of a sudden the economy starts booming again. Why? Because he lowered taxes and he lowered interest rates. So the answer is, if you cut taxes, if you understand economics 101, generally that will preserve jobs, it will create new jobs, it will stimulate the economy, and the revenue will go up. And even though you maybe lowered taxes by 3%, you usually make it up because the amount of revenue is so much greater that the lower tax rate gives you more tax revenue than if you raised taxes and people lost jobs and we continued in a recession. Now, hopefully that makes sense to you. But basically, when you lower taxes and when you lower interest rates, if you've often wondered why do they do this, it's because we want to stimulate the economy and raise the revenue that's being taxed. So if you want to learn more about this, I would recommend you read some of my books. I always address these types of issues in there. My most recent book is titled The Laser Fund, How to Diversify and Create the Foundation for a Tax-Free Retirement. And you'll understand, why does the government allow people to accumulate their money tax-free? Well, isn't that costing the government? No, it's saving them money. It's saving the government from trying to take care of you in your golden years and you're on welfare, or if you die, that your widow, your orphans have to rely on government. And so it's tax-free. And people think, well, that's a tax loophole. They ought to be taxing though. No, because people are simply trying to take ownership. So the key is, if you take ownership and you are more self-reliant, you'll take pressure off of the government and you can redirect otherwise payable taxes to causes you support. And when you do that, I'm convinced you can make better choices with what you do with those social dollars. Because if I can allocate that to my family or to my favorite charities that I believe allocate money in a better way than maybe government chooses to put money in things that I don't even agree with, that's what I mean by reallocating, by redirecting otherwise payable taxes to causes you believe in and you support. And I think, frankly, that is the better way to go. You can learn about it. Click on the link down here and get a copy of my most recent best-selling book. I'll pay for the book. You just pay for the shipping and handling. Does that sound okay?